Well, I don't think you're going to have any trouble hearing me, but you might have some trouble seeing me. Anybody here have a phone book? Can you see me back there? Can you see me? All right. I thought she was coming up with a phone book. Well, when I want to talk to you today, I wanted to offer you some images from debates in the 1960s, and some of you younger people think that the debates in the 1960s are old hat. They are, in fact, very live. Just in the last few weeks, I myself, at this campus, with the Hillel House here, reenacted in some ways the conflict that I wanted to be addressing you today. A number of weeks ago, I have a friend who was a Nobel Peace Prize nominee activist, Israeli activist, who rebuilds Palestinian houses demolished by the state of Israel unjustly. He's an anti-occupation activist, an Israeli. He was a corporal in the army. I and a few student groups approached the Hillel, and we were told that he would not be welcome to speak. This activist, Jeff Halpert, he himself actually was the first rabbinic student in the late 1960s to burn his draft card. Moved to Israel, became an educator, and later an organizer. I said, okay, Hillel doesn't want to bring a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, good guy. I understand they're a little nervous, maybe by the end of the year we'll have him back. The next week, the Hillel House then brought in F.E.A. Tom, former member of Knesset, a guy who moved back to Gaza in order to try and prevent the withdrawal out of Gaza a few years ago, initiated by Ariel Sharon. Somebody who is the farthest right-wing possible speaker. You could bring both comparable ages, both emerged out of the 1960s, both had a different trajectory politically as Jews, understanding their Judaism and their activism coming out of what they understand Judaism to be. These same debates were happening in Jewish theology in the 60s, and I just wanted to give you a taste of some of the fascinating figures in American Jewish Muslim. We're talking about elite discourse here. We're talking about theologians, writers, professors of philosophy, white Ashkenazi Jews. Our three principals, all from Germany. That's as Ashkenazi as you can get. Many of you probably know about Abraham Joshua Heschel. You've seen that iconic picture of him marching with Martin Luther King Jr. and Selma with those leis or whatever it is around their necks. Heschel has become, for the organized Jewish community, the image of a mythic story of black Jewish cooperation. That the Jewish community was right there with King in the figure of the prophetic Heschel. Heschel, a Hasidic Jew philosopher who moves from Eastern Europe to America, whose book, The Prophets, was on the required reading list of many of the seminary students who marched with King. Heschel, who addressed a conference on religion and race in 1963 and met then Martin Luther King. At that conference, Heschel said something like this, opening his speech: the first conference on religion and race was held in Pharaoh's court. He goes on to say in thunderous tones, a prophetic discourse, that racism is an eye disease, and that the Jewish community needs to do something about this. This is a time not for half-stepping, but for radical action. King, impressed with Heschel and also knowing his writings on the prophets, then collaborates with him over several projects. They speak in each other's presence over the years. And today, as I mentioned, Heschel is seen as iconic, as representing. The Jewish community is super proud of Heschel, that there was a Heschel, prophetic-looking, long beard, marching with King. But at the time, he was marginalized. His colleagues counseled him that he should not be working with this rabble-rouser king. People in the Jewish community, Southern rabbis, counseled him that this was not a good idea. He was not representing the community well. I am standing on my tippy toes and getting tired, so. I'll join you in the phone. Well, unlike my colleagues here have been very supportive of political activity, Heschel was not quite welcomed and seen as an oddball, even in the halls of Jewish Theological Seminary. But Heschel's position, as noble, courageous, and important as it was not the only position taken by rabbis, by philosophers, by activists in the 60s around the issues of civil rights, and I want to introduce you to several others. One from the far left, and one from the far right, and another who put a question mark around. I want to tell you about Stephen Schwarzschild. Anyone here heard of Stephen Schwarzschild? You know some of his relatives, because his niece lives here in Philadelphia, and in fact she was outside of the Hillel protesting Effie Tom last week. Stephen Schwarzschild is somebody we should all know. He was a German-born rabbi. He was first ordained Reform, and then later joined as well the conservative movement, and was the only rabbi to hold membership in both the Reform and conservative rabbinical associations. Stephen Schwarzschild understood himself as part of the tradition of Marburg Neo-Kantianism, a disciple of a philosopher who you should also know, Hermann Cohen. Schwarzschild was an influential figure in American Jewish letters. He edited the journal Judaism during a very important time in its history. He proceeded over the conference that really articulated what we now know to be what we now call today the Holocaust, a very important conference in the late 60s. He was a teacher of many important Jewish philosophers, et cetera, et cetera. Let me tell you a little bit about his thought. Schwarzschild held that Judaism was essentially a cluster of attitudes one takes towards the world, positions that one takes towards the world. You see the world as radically unfinished. You see the world as changeable. And you see a vocation that God is calling you to transform the world against its imperfect, unjust, and overall terrible conditions. That Judaism was about being active in the world, that Judaism